It doesn't start with lies. It starts with tone shifts, small changes in her voice when you question something, the way her eyes narrow just slightly when you mention spending time with friends. You think you're imagining it. You're not. Most men notice these signals but dismiss them as paranoia. But manipulation doesn't announce itself with sirens and warning labels. It whispers through micro-expressions. It shifts through subtle behavioral changes. It rewrites reality, one carefully calculated move at a time. These aren't accidents or mood swings. They're strategic maneuvers in a psychological chess game you didn't know you were playing. Every confused moment, every second-guessed instinct, every time you wondered if you were going crazy, that wasn't your imagination failing you. That was your intuition screaming truth while your conditioning told you to ignore it. By the end of this video, you'll see every string she's been pulling, and once you see them, you can never unsee them. If you value truth over comfortable lies, hit that like and hype buttons immediately. Subscribe to this channel and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to know where my strongest, most aware men are tuning in tonight. Understanding manipulation isn't bitterness or misogyny. It's emotional self-defense. It's pattern recognition. Here are 7 hacks that stop emotional control before it starts destroying your sanity. The guilt switch. How she reframes right and wrong. It begins with a sigh. A deliberate pause before she speaks. The kind of silence that feels heavy with disappointment. Then comes the gentle accusation, wrapped in concern and delivered with surgical precision. You're too cold lately. You've changed since we got together. You don't care about us anymore. You're becoming selfish. Notice how caring becomes your crime. How setting boundaries becomes evidence of your cruelty. How protecting your energy becomes proof of your selfishness. This is moral inversion at its finest. She flips the moral script until defending yourself feels like attacking her. The psychology here runs deeper than most men realize. Guilt bypasses your logical defenses completely. It triggers your protective instincts while simultaneously disarming your reasoning capabilities. When you feel guilty, your brain releases stress hormones that cloud judgment and impair decision-making. You stop thinking clearly and start reacting emotionally. Rational decisions become impossible when emotions flood your neural pathways like a tsunami. Watch for the softened tone that precedes accusations. The way her voice breaks just slightly when she says you're hurting her. How tears appear exactly when you start to push back against unreasonable demands. The strategic timing of vulnerability, right after you've said no to something. She knows guilt is your emotional kryptonite. Most men would rather surrender their position than feel like the villain in her story. She counts on this social conditioning. Notice how every boundary you attempt to set becomes evidence of your cruelty. How every time you prioritize your own needs, you're suddenly accused of being selfish. How your basic human needs transform into attacks on her well-being. How your attempt at self-care gets masterfully reframed as abandonment and betrayal. This isn't love speaking through concern. This is control wearing love's mask and speaking in love's voice. She positions herself as the eternal victim of your autonomy. Your independence becomes her oppression. Your strength becomes her suffering. The more you try to maintain your individual identity, the more you hurt her fragile emotional state. It's a perfect psychological trap with no apparent exit. But guilt isn't her sharpest tool in the manipulation toolbox. The next one cuts much deeper. The urgency trap. Pressure disguised as closeness. Everything suddenly becomes now, today, this very second, this exact moment. Why can't you just decide right now? We need to talk about this immediately. If you really loved me, you'd choose without hesitation. She compresses time until your mind has no space to think, process, or breathe. Urgency becomes the enemy of wisdom. When important decisions must be made instantly under pressure, manipulation thrives in the chaos. The psychology behind this is both simple and devastatingly effective. Artificial pressure creates automatic compliance. Your brain, suddenly flooded with artificial emergency signals, abandons careful thought and measured consideration for quick resolution and immediate relief. This is exactly how car salesmen work their magic, how dictators seize power during crisis moments, how manipulators close emotional deals before you realize what you're actually signing up for. She creates false emergencies that demand immediate answers to complex questions. Notice how every important relationship conversation happens when you're mentally exhausted. How she brings up major life-altering topics right before you leave for work. How she calls repeatedly until you answer, each missed call adding psychological pressure like a ticking time bomb. How emotional countdowns replace rational discussion and thoughtful consideration. You have exactly 5 minutes to decide if you love me. Choose right now, or I'm walking away forever. The invisible clock becomes her most powerful weapon. She knows time pressure forces poor decisions. That's exactly why she deploys it strategically. Watch how she creates completely false deadlines for emotional choices that shouldn't have deadlines. How waiting becomes twisted proof that you don't care. How thinking things through gets masterfully reframed as stalling tactics. How natural consideration becomes evidence of cruelty and indifference. She turns your basic human need to process information into evidence of emotional detachment. The more time you need to think, the less you must love her. The more you want to consider consequences, the more you must be hiding something sinister. She makes speed the primary measure of sincerity. Fast answers become proof of true feelings. Instant compliance becomes evidence of genuine care and commitment, because once she successfully controls time and your access to it, she'll aim for something much bigger and more fundamental: your entire perception of reality. The reality bend. Gaslight by correction. That never happened the way you remember it. You're exaggerating again like you always do. You remember everything wrong. She doesn't rewrite history all at once, like some dramatic movie villain. She edits it slowly and methodically. 10% adjustment here. 20% modification there. Gradually and patiently, until you question your own memory more than you trust hers. This is micro-discrediting in action. Psychological destruction by 1,000 tiny corrections. Your confidence in your own perception slowly withers under constant, gentle adjustment and contradiction. The human brain has a fundamental flaw that manipulators exploit ruthlessly. It prioritizes social acceptance and harmony over factual accuracy. When someone confidently contradicts your memory with calm certainty, doubt creeps into your mind like poison spreading through your bloodstream. She exploits this neurological weakness with scientific precision. Watch the unnaturally calm tone she uses when denying obvious, undeniable facts. How she laughs softly and dismissively after saying you're confused or mistaken. The way she recalls conversations with surgical precision while yours somehow remain perpetually fuzzy and unreliable. How she remembers exactly what you said 3 months ago, but conveniently forgets promises she made yesterday morning. Notice how she never questions her own memory, only yours. How your version of events always needs correction and adjustment. How she gradually positions herself as the reliable narrator of your shared relationship story. Your mind slowly becomes her personal editing room. She's the director of your memories. You're just the confused actor who keeps forgetting his lines and missing his cues. But here's the most insidious psychological twist. She doesn't gaslight major events first. She starts microscopically small. Tiny details that seem completely insignificant. What exact time you said you'd be home from work. Whether you promised to call during lunch break. Which specific movie you wanted to see next weekend. Each small correction plants a microscopic seed of self-doubt deep in your subconscious. Your certainty erodes one seemingly insignificant detail at a time. Soon, you're checking with her before trusting your own direct experiences. She gradually becomes the ultimate authority on your own life experiences. And when you start fundamentally doubting yourself and your own perceptions, she smoothly moves to phase 4. Complete control through emotional manipulation. The emotion economy. She rewards compliance with peace. The cycle is elegantly simple, but psychologically brutal. Tension when you resist her demands. Affection when you comply with her wishes. Complete withdrawal when you disagree with her perspective. You gradually learn to earn her good mood through surrender and submission. This is intermittent reinforcement in its purest form, the most addictive schedule of behavioral reward that psychology has ever documented. Like gambling addiction, the unpredictable payoff keeps you hooked and coming back for more. You become genuinely addicted to the relief that follows appeasement and surrender. Casinos use this exact same psychological principle to create gambling addicts. Slot machines don't pay out every single time. The uncertainty and unpredictability make the eventual reward exponentially more powerful and addictive. Random reinforcement creates obsession and compulsion. She applies this proven principle to emotional intimacy and affection. Sometimes she's genuinely warm and loving after you apologize. Sometimes she remains cold and distant. The unpredictability keeps you trying harder and harder. Notice how her warmth appears immediately after you apologize for things you didn't actually do wrong. How deafening silence follows every time you attempt to hold your ground. How physical affection becomes the prize you earn through emotional submission. How her mood brightens dramatically the moment you abandon your position completely. You gradually stop fighting because fighting feels emotionally expensive. The price of disagreement is complete emotional withdrawal and punishment. The reward for surrender is temporary peace and artificial harmony. But temporary is the absolutely crucial word here. The peace never lasts permanently. It's specifically designed not to last. Because if the peace were actually permanent, you'd stop working desperately for it. She needs you always earning her approval like a desperate employee. Always one small step away from losing her good mood. Always pathetically grateful for tiny scraps of affection and attention. She trains you exactly like a laboratory animal in a behavioral psychology experiment. Press the compliance button, get a small treat. Press the resistance button, get painful electric shock. Soon, you're pressing compliance automatically without conscious thought. You don't even remember actively choosing submission. But manipulation doesn't always look heavy and obvious. Sometimes it looks beautifully romantic. The sympathy mask. Weaponized vulnerability. Her voice trembles dramatically mid-argument. Suddenly, she's sharing detailed childhood trauma that you've never heard before. The tears aren't completely fake, but their precise timing is absolutely strategic. She resets accountability with carefully deployed pain, transforms direct confrontation into emergency rescue mission. Your mirror neurons fire like automatic machine guns. Logical thinking shuts down completely. Protective mode activates at maximum intensity. Instead of addressing the original issue you raised, you're desperately comforting the person who created the problem. This is emotional jujitsu at its most sophisticated level. She uses your greatest strength against you. Your natural compassion becomes her most powerful weapon. Men are evolutionarily wired to protect vulnerable women from harm. Evolution embedded this protective response deep in our neural pathways over millions of years. She knows this biological programming intimately and exploits it ruthlessly without mercy. Watch how sudden vulnerability appears only when she's completely cornered. How past emotional pain becomes present psychological armor. How every serious accountability conversation gets masterfully derailed by sudden emotional crisis. Notice the timing with laser precision and surgical accuracy. You bring up a completely legitimate concern, and suddenly she's sobbing about her absent father. You ask for basic accountability, and she reveals previously unknown trauma. You attempt to maintain reasonable boundaries, and she shares how broken and damaged she feels inside. The tears flow like clockwork. The voice breaks on perfect cue. The body language screams absolute fragility and helplessness. Your protective instincts completely override your logical brain. You find yourself apologizing profusely for hurting someone who was actively hurting you moments before. This isn't manipulation through brute force or obvious aggression. It's manipulation through strategic rescue positioning. She doesn't overpower your psychological defenses directly. She gets you to lower them voluntarily and willingly. Because what kind of monster argues with a crying woman? Who maintains firm boundaries with someone who's clearly suffering? Who pushes back against visible pain and obvious trauma? Your natural compassion becomes her impenetrable shield. Her carefully displayed pain becomes your invisible cage. Yet the most sophisticated manipulation doesn't seek your pity or sympathy. It seeks something much more valuable. Your fundamental life purpose. The purpose hijack, making you responsible for her happiness. You make me feel completely worthless. When you do that specific thing, I can't function normally. Your behavior directly controls my entire emotional state. She systematically links her mood to your actions until you become her personal emotional regulator. This transfers learned helplessness directly onto your shoulders. Her happiness becomes your full-time job. Her pain becomes your personal failure. You gradually stop living your own life and start managing hers instead. The psychology behind this is brilliant in its elegant simplicity. She makes you the direct source of both her problems and her solutions. When she feels sad, it's because you weren't sufficiently attentive. When she feels angry, it's because you said the wrong thing. When she feels happy, it's because you finally got something right. You become genuinely addicted to being her emotional fix and solution. Notice the constant emotional scorekeeping that never ends. How her feelings always depend entirely on your choices and actions. How her bad days somehow trace back to something you did or failed to do. How her mental state becomes your daily report card and performance review. Watch how she measures your love by your willingness to sacrifice your peace for hers. How truly caring means dropping everything instantly to manage her unstable mood. How being a good partner means being available whenever her emotions need regulation and management. You slowly transform from equal partner to unpaid caretaker. From a relationship equal to an emotional employee. Your job description becomes keeping her psychologically stable. Your performance review happens every single time she feels something uncomfortable. You start obsessively monitoring your words, your tone, your facial expressions. Everything becomes about not triggering her emotional chaos and instability. You walk on eggshells in your own relationship and home. Your precious energy gets completely spent managing her feelings instead of living your actual life. And once your fundamental life purpose gets hijacked completely, there's only one lever left to pull. Your personal boundaries, the boundary test, how she confuses love with control. Small intrusions first, checking your phone while you're in the shower. Mocking personal goals you mentioned in confidence. Showing up uninvited to places you specifically said you needed space, then watching your reaction very carefully. If you don't defend the line firmly, she moves it significantly closer. This is boundary erosion in systematic action. Each unchallenged violation becomes the new normal baseline. Real love doesn't test limits repeatedly. Control does. The psychology of power requires constant verification and testing. She needs ongoing proof that she can reshape your world, that your resistance is actually negotiable, that your boundaries are really just suggestions, not actual laws. Watch for seemingly harmless violations that aren't actually harmless. How she casually reads your private messages over your shoulder. How she systematically criticizes your friends until you see them much less. How she finds creative reasons you can't pursue interests that don't include her. Notice how she masterfully frames boundary testing as evidence of love. If you really loved me, you'd share your password willingly. If we're truly close, privacy shouldn't matter between us. If you actually trusted me, you wouldn't mind me looking through everything. She makes invasion look exactly like intimacy. Control masquerades perfectly as caring. Possession pretends convincingly to be passionate love. The progression is gradual, but absolutely relentless. First, she wants to know where you are at all times. Then exactly who you're with. Then what you're discussing. Then she wants to be physically there. Then she wants to speak for you. Then she wants to decide for you. Each step feels completely reasonable after the previous one. But step back and look at the full picture objectively. How much of your life requires her explicit approval? How many of your decisions need her input and permission? How often do you automatically check with her before acting? She doesn't take your boundaries by brutal force. She erodes them through patient, systematic pressure. Because the moment you stop actively defending your peace, someone else starts systematically redesigning it according to their preferences. Ask yourself this crucial question tonight. Are you actually being loved, or are you being managed like a resource? Look at your relationship through this revealing lens. Count how many of these manipulation patterns sound familiar. Notice which specific tactics show up most often in your daily interactions. Because once you finally see the strings clearly, you can never unsee them again. And that's exactly when your real life begins.